13 years ago I was last in the Crimea. Now the Crimea is the peninsula off the southern coast of the Ukraine, and more recently it's been stolen by the Russians. But when I was in the Crimea, one of the things that we found was that there was a lot of red champagne for sale. Now it's a wine, it's a grape growing area, and they're grapes with a very high sugar content, so they tend to produce a lot of sweet wines and champagnes, which aren't really sold in the West because we prefer our wines to be dry. But when I was there, I thought to myself, this red champagne is rather nice, and I think it's worth trying out making some at home. Not from grapes, because up here in the northeast of England we don't have enough of the sun to grow sufficient quantity of sweet grapes. But we've got two berries in particular which we could use as an alternative. These are elderberries and blackberries. So, having made elderflower champagne in the past, I'm going to adapt my recipe and try my hand at making red champagne. These are elderberries growing next to our allotment, and they are in absolute abundance towards the end of August and early September. Absolutely mountains of them, so they make great wine, and I'm going to pick a bucket of these. So the second fruit going in are blackberries, and these, like the elder, grow in huge abundance. Brambles or blackberries will grow just about anywhere, and they will take over land. So these berries, always ripening from about mid-August onwards, sometimes earlier, they're going to go into the red champagne as well. Back home now, so we have one bucket of elderberries on their stalks, and in this sack we have mainly blackberries but a few elderberries on stalks as well. If you've got a fruit press, then you can skip the next stage, which is to strip the berries from their stalks. Now that's just a small proportion of what we've picked. Sadly, the next stage is then to mash it up. Now that can be great fun, but if it's full of stalks, it just takes so much more time and you get less out of it. So I've stripped them. It's the world's most boring job. And then I'm going to give them a good mash. So you can see this is now a wet pulp, wet and mushy, so this is now ready for the next stage. So tip it into a sieve and let the juice run through into the bowl underneath. I've now finished pressing the pulp through the sieve. So this is the juice. Now that's pure blackberry and elderberry juice. And when I was putting it through the sieve, I was actually pressing it through to make sure as much as of the juice as possible has gone through. And now we've put the pulp into a preserving pan. So here's the preserving pan with the pulp in, and we've added a bit of water, just enough to cover it. And what we're going to do is try and simmer out the rest of the juice, and then this, once it's ready, will go through the sieve again. The aim is to get the maximum amount of juice out of the pulp. The juice from the fruit has now been transferred into a bucket, so that's it in the bucket. So we're going to put that to one side overnight, and then we're going to strain in a couple of minutes the fruit pulp that's been in the pan, and we're going to keep for the time being the two different juices separate, because the first juice has natural yeast in it, and we want that to ferment the juice and turn it into champagne. What we've done with the juice in the pan, because we've boiled it up, is that has now killed off any of the yeast in it. And therefore, if we bung that lot in with the first bit of juice, it'll still be hot at this point, and therefore it'll kill off the yeast in the juice that we got on the first round. And we don't want that to happen, because we want that yeast there to do the fermenting. So it will be allowed to strain overnight, the juice from the pan, and it will cool down overnight as well. And then tomorrow morning we'll mix the two together. So here we have the boiled pulp, and it is just draining through these two sieves. I put it into two separate bowls and two sieves just to make it a bit quicker. And this should be ready in the morning for the next stage. So overnight the juice has been straining. I've got 2 bowls of that to go into the fermenting bucket with the extract that we got last night. And what we're going to also add is 1 cup of sugar. Now, the berries have sugars in anyway, so we don't want to add too much sugar, but at the end of the day it comes down very much to taste. So if you want a really sweet one, then obviously more sugar. But just bear in mind that there are lots of natural sugars in the juice from the fruit. And I'm also going to add in just a 1/4 cup of vinegar. And the point about that is that slows down the fermentation process. If you don't put it in, then what will happen is what happened to me a few years ago when I made elderflower champagne. No vinegar in to slow down or moderate the fermentation process. So when we opened the bottles, it blew out most of the contents and the corks went into low Earth orbit. In the fermenting bucket we've now got all the ingredients. So remember, don't need to add yeast to this because there'll be naturally occurring yeast from the berries. A little bit of sugar, very much to taste. Give it a good stir to make sure that the sugar is dissolved, and a little bit of vinegar to slow up the process. And then you leave this standing for about 4 days in a cool room with a tea towel over the top of it. And for 4 days should be enough to get the fermentation process underway. And that's really convenient for me because I'm about to go away for 4 days, so I'll have this to deal with when I get back. The champagne has been fermenting for a few days now. You can see the mould on the surface. So what we're going to do now is scrape off that mould. So to do that, we simply use a serving spoon. So we've taken off as much as we can at this stage. Right, so most of the mould has been taken off the surface, and what we're going to do is just test it. First of all, I'm checking to see it hasn't turned to vinegar, and it doesn't seem to have done. But what we also need to do is add some more sugar to this because this is quite dry, and because it's a champagne it's meant to be reasonably sweet. So we'll probably add another cupful of sugar. And give that a good stir, and again in a moment we'll test to see whether we think it's sweet enough. Ultimately the sweetness comes down to taste, but there needs to be enough sugars in the champagne for the fermentation to continue in the bottles. So once you're satisfied with the sweetness, you need champagne bottles to put this into. Now the reason for champagne bottles is, well, it is obviously red champagne, but these are very heavy, tough bottles. Put them into wine bottles and they'll explode after a few days. These, however, are designed to take the pressure of the fermented champagne inside them. So we have 3 bottles of red champagne, and as you can see we put a cork, it's a plastic cork in this case, on the top, and it is wired down because the fermentation continues in the bottle. So if you don't have the cork wired down, it's likely to be blown out and you lose the entire contents. You'll also get a bit of a sediment in there as well, but when you store them lying on their side like that. There are commercial ways for the sediment to be frozen and sliced off, and then the pork cork goes back in. We're just amateurs, so we'll put up with the sediment at the bottom. Now, 3 bottles, and we completely miscalculated the amount that we had, because we thought we only needed 3 bottles, and in fact we have nearly a litre of the blackberry and elderberry juice left over. So we're not going to make another bottle of champagne with that. Instead, we're going to turn that into a fruit liqueur. So, into a kiln and jar, put 200 grams of sugar and then 400 mils of the champagne mix, and then here comes the boozy bit, about the similar quantity of vodka. Now the actual quantities of vodka and liquid champagne can vary. You could put up to 600 mils of vodka into there. It just depends on how strong you want it, I guess. Now, normally when I make fruit liqueurs, I have these standing in a bottle for about 3 months, and it takes about up to a month for all the sugar to dissolve, and this would then get a shake every day in its first month, and then a shake every week until the 3 months are up. But because this is all liquid juice from the fruit, then you don't actually need to wait 3 months to drink it. It should be ready within about a month, and the vodka in there will actually kill the yeast, so there'll be no fermenting in here, so you don't need to worry about it exploding. But in about a month's time, this will be ready for drinking. It's been a couple of weeks since we bottled up the red champagne, and we had 3 bottles. There's 2 of them. Now here's the third, and as you can see it has blown its cork, which means that it was fermenting more heavily in the bottle than I was expecting. However, since this is now blown some of its contents all over our kitchen, the rest of the contents of this bottle can at least be tested. Now, it's lost its fizz because of it having blown out at the top of the bottle, but you know, that's not bad. That's not bad at all.